I watch Claire's fingers dance across the railing, her wedding ring catching the last rays of sunset as we pull away from port. 15 years of marriage condensed into the gentle sway of her hand, familiar yet somehow distant tonight. The cruise was her idea. 10 days to reconnect, David. Just you and me. The words echo in my mind now, carrying a weight I hadn't noticed before. The majestic dream lives up to its name, all gleaming brass and polished mahogany. Our suite is more luxurious than we can afford, but Claire insisted we splurge. We deserve this, she'd said, though her voice carried an undertone I couldn't quite place. Desperation? Guilt? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered like a shadow at the edge of consciousness. We're at dinner when we first hear about him. The whispers ripple through the main dining room like waves against the hull. Someone won big at the casino. 10 million. The kind of money that changes lives, or destroys them. I notice Claire's posture shift, her spine straightening as the murmurs intensify around us. Would you mind sharing your table? The head waiter approaches with a stranger in tow. Tall, tanned, maybe 45. His smile carries the easy confidence of someone who's never worried about a bill in his life, who's never had to choose between paying the mortgage or fixing the car. James Chin. He introduces himself, settling into the empty chair at our table. Hope you don't mind the company. It's been quite a night. His eyes linger on Claire a moment too long, and something in my chest tightens, a familiar ache of insecurity I thought I'd outgrown years ago. The conversation flows as smoothly as the wine he orders, a bottle that costs more than our monthly mortgage payment. Claire leans forward, laughing at his stories, her cheeks flushed. I notice she's twisting her wedding ring, an old nervous habit I haven't seen since the early days of our marriage when we were still learning each other's shadows. The ship's alarm shatters the moment. Code Alpha. A passenger missing from Deck 7. As security personnel rush past our table, James raises an eyebrow. Well, this cruise just got interesting. Claire's hand finds mine under the table, but her grip feels mechanical, distracted, like muscle memory rather than genuine connection. Her eyes keep drifting to James, who's now gesturing animatedly about his casino win. The story spills out, a lucky streak at baccarat, followed by an all-or-nothing bet that paid off spectacularly. Life's about taking chances, he says, meeting Claire's gaze. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the sweetest rewards. The words hang in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning that makes my stomach knot. I feel it then, the subtle shift in the air, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Claire's fingers slip from mine as she reaches for her wine glass. In the background, the ship's alarm continues its mournful wail, but it's the silence between my wife and me that deafens. Later, in our suite, Claire stands at the window, her silhouette carved against the moonlit ocean. Wasn't that incredible about James? She asks, her voice dreamy, distant, the same tone she used to use when talking about our future together, before mortgage payments and routine dulled our dreams. I step beside her, trying to read her expression in the glass reflection. Some risks aren't worth taking, I say carefully. She doesn't respond, just keeps staring out at the darkness, and I wonder if she's seeing something out there that I can't, some alternate version of her life that doesn't include 15 years of shared history, of morning coffee and goodnight kisses, of dreams both realized and abandoned. The missing passenger announcement plays again over the intercom, but it feels distant now, overshadowed by an unsettling certainty. Our marriage isn't the only thing that will be tested on this cruise. As I watched Claire's reflection, her eyes focused on some point far beyond the horizon, I realize we've already begun drifting into dangerous waters, carried by currents I never saw coming. Morning light filters through our cabin window, catching the empty space beside me where Claire should be. Her pillow still holds the impression of her head, but it's cold to the touch. A note on the nightstand reads, "Gone for an early swim. Back soon." Her handwriting seems different somehow, more hurried, less careful, like her thoughts are already elsewhere. I find her at the pool, but she's not swimming. She's sitting at the deck bar with James Chen, both laughing over something I can't hear. The distance between us, 20 feet of sun-bleached deck, feels like an ocean. Claire's wearing the red swimsuit I bought her last anniversary, the one she said was too revealing for public. My chest tightens at the sight. Your wife's quite the storyteller, James says when I approach, his smile too perfect, too practiced. She was just telling me about your first date, the broken down car, the rain, the Chinese takeout in the parking lot. That was our story. The private kind of memory that belongs in a sealed box of precious things, not scattered carelessly across a cruise ship deck for strangers' entertainment. Claire doesn't meet my eyes as she sips her morning mimosa. David, come sit, she says, patting the chair between them, but James smoothly slides over, placing himself in that space instead. The movement seems casual, yet deliberate, like a chess piece advancing. A new voice breaks the tension. Morning, folks. What can I get you? The bartender, his name tag reads Marcus, has kind eyes and smile lines that deepen as he studies our trio. Something in his expression suggests he's seen this scene play out before. Bloody Mary, I say, needing something stronger than coffee. As Marcus prepares the drink, he leans close. Word of advice, he murmurs, voice barely audible above the deck music. Keep your friends close on this ship. His eyes flick meaningfully toward James. The morning stretches into afternoon. James regales us with stories of his business empire, each tale more impressive than the last. Claire hangs on every word, her body angled toward him like a flower tracking the sun. When he mentions his recent divorce, her eyes spark with something I pretend not to recognize. Sometimes things just run their course, James says, swirling his scotch. The trick is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The words land like body blows, and I notice Claire's hand trembling slightly as she reaches for her glass. The ship's intercom crackles, still no sign of the missing passenger. Searches of all decks have proved fruitless. Claire shivers despite the warmth. It's frightening, isn't it? The idea of just disappearing. Some people want to disappear, James replies, his eyes meeting hers. Some people are just waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity. The double meaning hangs in the air like storm clouds. Later, I find a business card in our cabin, James Chin, investment consultant. On the back, a handwritten note. Suite 721. Drinks tonight? The handwriting matches the ink stains I noticed on Claire's fingers at lunch. When I confront her about it, her denial comes too quickly. He invited us both, David. Don't be paranoid. But her eyes skitter away from mine, and she busies herself with unpacking, something she'd already done yesterday. That night, Marcus pulls me aside at the bar. Your friend Mr. Chin, he says carefully, wiping a glass that's already clean. He was on this ship 6 months ago. Different name then. Different story too. He hesitates. Different wife. I watch Claire disappear into the elevator, heading to deck 7. She thinks I didn't notice her leaving. She thinks I didn't see James stepping into the same elevator 2 minutes earlier. I order another drink and wait, the ice melting in my glass like the certainties I once held about my marriage. The poker chips feel cold between my fingers as I watch Claire's reflection in the casino's mirrored walls. She's standing too close to James, their shoulders almost touching as he explains the rules of Texas Hold'em. Her laughter carries across the room, a sound I once knew by heart but now seems to belong to a stranger. Small blind, big blind, James explains, his hand brushing Claire's as he demonstrates proper chip placement. The touch lingers a fraction too long, and I notice Claire doesn't pull away. Instead, she leans in closer, her wedding ring catching the harsh casino lights like an accusation. Marcus appears at my elbow with a scotch I didn't order. On the house, he murmurs, then adds quietly. Watch how he handles his chips. The way a man plays poker tells you everything about how he plays life. His words carry the weight of someone who's witnessed too many stories like this one. The game begins. 4 players, James, Claire, myself, and an elderly woman who introduces herself as Ruth. But it might as well be just the 3 of us. Every hand feels like a private battle, each bet loaded with subtext. Claire's never been good at poker. Her tells are as familiar to me as her morning routine. The way she touches her collar when she's bluffing, how her eyes drift left when she's confident. But tonight she's different. Controlled. Like she's been practicing with someone else. All in, James announces, pushing his stack forward. His eyes lock onto Claire's, some private message passing between them. She folds immediately, though I glimpse her cards as they fall, pocket aces. A winning hand abandoned. The ship lurches suddenly, glasses tinkling at the bar. A voice crackles over the intercom. Attention passengers. We're experiencing some technical difficulties on the lower decks. Please remain calm. Just a burst pipe, James says smoothly, but something in his expression suggests knowledge withheld. Happens all the time on these old ships. He reaches for his drink, and I notice a small scar on his wrist, fresh, still pink. Similar to the one I'd spotted on Claire's palm this morning, the one she'd dismissed as a paper cut. Screams erupt from below, followed by the sound of rushing water. Casino staff rush to the doors, their faces tight with controlled panic. As chaos erupts around us, I catch a glimpse of Claire and James exchanging glances, not of surprise or fear, but of something that looks unsettlingly like anticipation. We should check on our suite, Claire says, standing too quickly. The lower decks are nowhere near our cabin, I finish, the words coming out sharper than intended. We're on deck 9. James steps between us, ever the mediator. I'll escort Claire to check on her things, he offers. David, why don't you see if the bar needs help with crowd control? Before I can object, they're moving through the crowd together, his hand on the small of her back, exactly where mine should be. As they disappear into the corridor, I notice Claire's forgotten her purse. Inside, a key card for a room on deck 4. Our suite key is still in my pocket. The burst pipe alarm blares on, but it's the sound of my own heartbeat that drowns out everything else. Marcus appears again, his face grave. That's not just a burst pipe down there, he says, eyes on the corridor where Claire and James vanished. And that's not just a friendly game they're playing with you. The casino lights flicker, casting strange shadows across the abandoned poker table. Claire's pocket aces lie face up, a reminder of the winning hand she chose to surrender. I pocket the cards, knowing somehow they're evidence of something bigger, a game I'm only beginning to understand the rules of. The invitation arrives on cream-colored cardstock, James Chen's name embossed in gold leaf. An evening of chance and fortune. I watch Claire's fingers tremble as she reads it, her thumb unconsciously twisting her wedding ring, a gesture that once meant anxiety but now speaks of anticipation. We should go, she says too quickly, not meeting my eyes. It would be rude to decline. The words feel rehearsed, as if she's been practicing them in front of our cabin mirror. I wonder how many other lies she's rehearsed there, in the space where we used to share sleepy morning conversations and gentle adjustments of each other's collars. The casino has been transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast honeygold light across green felt tables, turning everyone beautiful in that dangerous way that makes truth feel negotiable. Claire disappeared into our cabin for hours preparing, emerging in a black dress I've never seen before. The price tag she forgot to remove spoke of a purchase made in secret, in preparation. James holds court at the high-stakes table, his laugh carrying across the room like smoke. Claire drifts toward him as if pulled by invisible threads, each step taking her further from the life we built. I watch her slip into the empty seat beside him, the space seemingly reserved just for her. Your wife looks stunning tonight, Marcus says, appearing beside me with a drink that tastes of warnings. But you might want to notice how that dress matches the one on the woman beside Mr. Chen in the photograph by the bar. He nods toward a framed picture of casino winners. James stands there, dated 6 months ago, his arm around a woman wearing an identical black dress. She isn't in any of the more recent photos. The night unfolds like a slow-motion car crash. I stand at the periphery, watching Claire laugh at James's jokes, each smile a small betrayal. Their shoulders touch when he leans in to whisper something that makes her blush. Her hand finds his arm too naturally, too familiarly, speaking of practice I don't want to contemplate. The security guard, a man named Phillips who's been watching James all evening, takes a step toward their table and suddenly staggers. His face goes pale, then gray. As he collapses, I catch a glimpse of his notebook falling open, photographs of James with different women on different cruises, dates methodically noted. The room erupts in chaos. Medical personnel rush in as James takes control of the situation with practiced ease. "Give the man space," he commands, guiding people back. But it's the way Claire moves in sync with him that breaks something inside me, their choreography too perfect to be coincidental. Later, I find Claire on our balcony, her silhouette carved against the starlit ocean. The black dress ripples in the wind like secrets trying to escape. "Phillips will be fine," she says before I can speak. "Just dehydration, they think." Her concern sounds genuine, but there's something else in her voice, relief perhaps, or fear masked as relief. "That's not what I was going to ask," I say quietly. "I was going to ask where you bought the dress." She stiffens, almost imperceptibly. "A boutique in Port." The lie comes smoothly, well practiced. Last-minute purchase. I step closer, close enough to smell unfamiliar cologne clinging to the fabric. "Funny," I say, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. How it matches the one in James's old photo perfectly. Down to the last detail. Claire's hands grip the railing, knuckles white. For a moment, I think she'll confess everything. Instead, she turns to me with eyes that belong to a stranger. "I'm tired, David. We should get some rest." As she walks past me into our cabin, I notice something fall from her clutch, a small key card, different from ours. I pocket it before she can notice, this small piece of evidence joining the growing collection of betrayals I'm gathering like breadcrumbs in the dark. Inside, I can hear her humming in the shower, an old song from our early days together. The sound mingles with the distant thrum of the ship's engines and the even more distant sound of ambulance sirens at our last port of call, all of it combining into a symphony of things falling apart. Morning light filters through our cabin's porthole, casting strange shadows across Claire's empty side of the bed. The sheets still hold the impression of her body, but the lingering scent of her shampoo has been replaced by something else, something expensive and unfamiliar that makes my stomach twist. Her nightgown lies discarded on the bathroom floor, damp with morning dew. She told me she was going to the gym. The ship's gentle sway feels more like vertigo now, each pitch and roll echoing the uncertainty in my chest. I find myself cataloging the small betrayals, the new passwords on her phone, the way she turns it face down when I enter our cabin, how she stopped wearing the sapphire earrings I gave her for our 10th anniversary. Each detail adds to a mosaic I don't want to complete. Marcus finds me at his bar, staring into a coffee that's gone cold. "Your wife," he says carefully, wiping the same glass he's been polishing for 10 minutes. "She joined them for breakfast again." The pause between them and again carries the weight of things he's seen but won't directly name. "Just new friends." I echo Claire's constant refrain, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. "She's always been social." Marcus sets down the glass with deliberate care. "Mr. Chen's previous companions were social too." He hesitates, then adds, "until they weren't." The memory surfaces unbidden, Claire at our wedding, promising forever with tears in her eyes. Now those same eyes slide past me like I'm a stranger, focusing on some distant point I can't see. When did her smile become something she rehearses rather than feels? I find her at the upper deck lounge, surrounded by what she calls her cruise family. James sits at the center like a dark star pulling everything into his orbit. Claire's laugh carries across the space, that new laugh she's developed, higher and more brittle than her real one. She's wearing a bracelet I've never seen before, silver catching sunlight like Morse code spelling out warnings. "David." Her voice hits a false note when she spots me. "We were just discussing tonight's dinner plans." The "we" excludes me even as she pats the chair beside her. But before I can sit, someone else fills the space. The choreography feels rehearsed. A commotion erupts at the railing. Someone screaming about a body in the water. The deck erupts in chaos as passengers rush to look. In the confusion, I catch Claire exchanging a glance with James, not surprise or horror, but something that looks unsettlingly like calculation. The captain's voice crackles over the intercom, calling for calm as rescue procedures initiate. Claire's hand trembles as she reaches for her drink, but when I move to comfort her, she flinches away. The gesture is tiny but devastating, 15 years of marriage undone in a single reflexive movement. Later, I find a crumpled note in our cabin's trash. Same time. Same place. He's getting suspicious. The handwriting isn't Claire's, but the smudged lipstick stain on the corner matches her new shade, the one she bought at the ship's boutique after claiming to hate their cosmetics line. Night falls like a curtain over the ocean, and Claire still hasn't returned to our cabin. I stand on our balcony, watching lights flicker in other windows across the ship's hull. In one, I catch a glimpse of her silhouette, stories above where she should be. The figure beside her is familiar, their shadows merging as they move behind the glass. The search for the passenger continues below, rescue boats casting white beams across the dark water. Each sweep of light reveals nothing but waves, like the surface of our marriage, smooth and unremarkable until you notice what's missing underneath. I clutch the railing, remembering how Claire used to hold my hand during storms, how she'd press close and whisper that nothing could break us as long as we held on together. Now I stand alone in the dark, watching the lights search for someone lost at sea, wondering if I'm witnessing a tragic accident or a carefully orchestrated disappearance. Either way, the symbolism feels too perfect to ignore. Another soul vanished into the depths while others pretend not to see the warning signs. There's a peculiar kind of silence that fills a room where trust once lived. I stand in our cabin, holding Claire's forgotten scarf, the silk still warm from her neck, carrying traces of a cologne I've never bought her. The note falls from its folds like autumn leaves. Meet me where the stars touch the sea. The handwriting is deliberately disguised, but I recognize the way she dots her I's, a habit 15 years of marriage has burned into my memory. My hands shake as I fold the scarf, remembering how I used to wrap it around her shoulders on cold mornings. Now it feels like evidence in a crime I'm not ready to name. Marcus's words echo in my mind. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight, waiting for us to be brave enough to see it. The bartender has become my reluctant confidant in this floating world of half-truths. Let me help you check his suite, he offers during a quiet moment at the bar. I have access to master keys. His eyes hold the weight of having witnessed this story before, with different actors but the same tragic script. James's suite is a study in calculated luxury. Everything perfectly arranged, like the set of a play waiting for its actors. Claire's perfume lingers in the air, not the vanilla she's worn for years, but something new, something chosen for someone else's pleasure. On the desk, a stack of gift-wrap boxes catches my eye, each bearing Cartier's distinctive red ribbon. Gifts for his special guests, Marcus explains softly. Always the same pattern, jewelry first, then promises, then nothing but silence. He opens a drawer, revealing a folder of photographs. Different cruises, different women, same practiced smile. Same black dress. A keycard falls from between the pages, identical to the one I found in Claire's purse. My throat tightens as Marcus points to the surveillance photo clipped to it, Claire entering this same suite last night, while I slept alone in our bed, dreaming of happier days. Just a colleague, she'd said this morning, not meeting my eyes. You're imagining things, David. But the evidence surrounds me now, her reading glasses on his nightstand, her favorite lipstick forgotten in his bathroom, a handwritten note about flight connections after the cruise. The ship's horn sounds, startling me. In my haste to leave, I knock over a chess set. As I restore the pieces, I notice the white queen is missing, replaced by one from another set. The replacement is identical at first glance, but subtly wrong, like my marriage has become. Back in our cabin, Claire's unpacking her shopping bags, humming that tune she's taken to lately. I got you something, she says, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She hands me a watch, expensive, elegant, gilt-wrapped in platinum. To replace your old one. I look down at my current watch, the one she gave me on our first anniversary. The face is scratched, the band worn, but each mark tells a story of our shared life. I like my old one, I say quietly. Something flickers across her face. Regret? Fear? Then it's gone, replaced by that new smile I'm learning to dread. Night falls, and Claire claims she's meeting her book club in the library. I watch her walk down the corridor, turn left instead of right, head high like someone who's rehearsed their movements. The diamonds at her throat, James's latest gift, though she doesn't know I know, catch the light like tears. I sit in our darkened cabin, holding the evidence of her betrayal, the note, the key card, the photographs Marcus helped me collect. Outside, the ocean whispers secrets to the hull, and somewhere above me, my wife is in another man's arms, while I guard the ruins of our marriage like a tomb robber who's forgotten how to leave the cemetery. The ship's bar at midnight holds a different kind of silence, thick with unspoken words and shadowed intentions. I watch James Chen's reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bottles, studying how he manufactures charm like some people manufacture widgets. His $10 million smile doesn't reach his eyes. I wondered when we'd have this conversation, he says, swirling aged scotch in a crystal glass. The casual gesture feels rehearsed, like everything else about him. Though I hoped we might avoid it entirely. For Claire's sake. Her name in his mouth feels like a violation. 15 years of morning kisses and shared dreams reduced to syllables on a stranger's tongue. I think of the first time I heard her name, how it felt like a song I wanted to learn by heart. Now it sounds like a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. Tell me about the others, I say quietly, sliding across the photographs Marcus helped me collect. The ones before Claire. Each image shows a different woman, different cruise, same story written in identical black dresses and Cartier boxes. Something flickers behind his perfect facade, surprise perhaps, or annoyance at having his script disrupted. The past is irrelevant, he says, but his fingers betray him, drumming against the bar in a nervous rhythm. Claire and I. Don't. The word comes out raw, stripped of pretense. Don't say her name like you know her. Like you understand what she means to me. A body appears on the upper deck, they announce over the intercom. The ship shudders to a halt, engines dying into eerie silence. In that suspended moment, I see something real cross James's face, not concern for the dead, but calculation. We should focus on the tragedy at hand. He deflects smoothly, rising from his seat. But Marcus appears like a ghost, placing a fresh drink before each of us with deliberate care. The gentleman will want to hear about Mrs. Peterson first, Marcus says, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated secrets. From the Atlantic crossing last spring. Before she disappeared. James's hand tightens on his glass. You're overstepping, bartender. Am I? Marcus pulls out a worn envelope, dropping it between us. Her family might disagree. They're still looking for answers. The ship's lights flicker as emergency protocols engage. Through the window, I watch rescue boats deploy, their searchlights cutting white wounds across the dark water. Each beam illuminates fragments of truth I've been afraid to face. Claire is different, James says finally, but the words sound hollow, rehearsed. What we have is real. What you have, I reply, is a pattern. I spread out the evidence Marcus helped me gather. Hotel receipts, surveillance photos, bank transfers. How many wives have you convinced they were special? How many marriages have you collected like trophies? His mask slips for just a moment, revealing something cold beneath. They chose to leave. All of them. I simply provided an opportunity. A commotion erupts above us. They've found the body. James moves to stand, but I grip his arm. In the distance, I hear Claire's voice among the crowd gathering on deck. She's looking for him, not me. The realization burns like acid. If anything happens to her, I say softly, feeling the weight of Marcus's silent witness behind the bar. If she disappears like the others. Threats, David? His smile returns, practiced and pristine. How disappointing. I expected better from you. He stands, straightening his perfectly tailored jacket. Besides, Claire's already made her choice. She just hasn't told you yet. He walks away, leaving me with an empty glass and a bar full of ghosts. Through the window, I watch him join Claire at the railing. She leans into him with the easy intimacy we once shared, while below them, rescue workers pull a body from the uncaring sea. Marcus quietly clears the glasses. "The story isn't over," he says, his voice gentle with understanding. "But you need to decide if you're ready for the ending." I stare at the photographs spread before me, each smiling face a warning I can't deliver to my wife. Outside, the ship's horn sounds, 3 long blasts marking the recovery of the dead. I wonder how many other horns have sounded for James Chen's disappeared women, how many other husbands have sat at bars like this one, watching their lives unravel like old rope. Time moves strangely in moments of revelation. I stand in the doorway of Suite 721, my shadow stretching across the threshold like a line between before and after. The keycard in my hand, the one Marcus slipped me with eyes full of apology, feels impossibly heavy. Claire's laughter reaches me first. That new laugh, the one that belongs to a stranger wearing my wife's face. Then I see them, Claire perched on the suite's leather sofa, James's fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. The intimacy of the gesture stops my breath. It's how I used to touch her on lazy Sunday mornings, back when we still belonged to each other. "David." My name falls from her lips like something broken. The color drains from her face, leaving behind a mask I don't recognize. Her hand flies to her throat, to the necklace James gave her, a reflexive gesture of protection, but of what, and from whom? James doesn't move from his position beside her, his possession complete enough to breed comfort. "This isn't how we wanted you to find out," he says, as if they'd planned some gentler devastation. As if there's a kind way to destroy 15 years of marriage. "When?" The question scrapes my throat. "When did we become a lie?" Claire stands, her movements uncertain for the first time since this cruise began. The black dress, the one that matches his other victims, shifts like oil on water. "It's not what you think," she starts, but the words die as our eyes meet. Even now, she can't quite bring herself to lie directly to my face. "Tell me about the others," I say quietly, watching James's perfect composure crack just slightly. "Tell her about Mrs. Peterson, James. About all the women who came before, who wore that same dress, who believed they were special." Claire's head turns sharply toward James, the first seed of doubt blooming in her expression. But he's had practice at this moment too. His hand finds her waist, proprietary and practiced. "David's upset," he soothes. "He's trying to hurt you because he's hurting." "No." My voice finds its strength. "I'm trying to save you from becoming another disappearing act in his collection." The ship's engines thrum beneath us, a steady pulse counting moments in a marriage's death. Claire takes a step toward me, then stops, caught between worlds. I see the struggle in her eyes. The woman she was battling, the woman she's becoming. "I love him," she whispers, each word a small betrayal. "It's different with us." "Real." "Real?" The photograph feels heavy in my pocket. I pull it out, James with another woman, 6 months ago, same suite, same dress. "As real as it was with her? With all of them?" The color drains from Claire's face as she stares at the image. Her hand trembles as she takes it, recognition dawning in her eyes. The necklace at her throat, identical to the one in the photo, suddenly looks less like jewelry and more like a collar. "You said I was the first." She turns to James, her voice small. "You said this was different." His response is smooth, practiced. "The past is irrelevant. What we have." "Stop." The word comes from Claire, surprising us all. "Just stop." The silence that follows feels like glass about to shatter. I watch my wife's face as 15 years of trust collides with 2 weeks of fantasy. The impact leaves wreckage in its wake. "I should go," she says finally, not looking at either of us. She moves toward the door, then pauses beside me. The familiar scent of her perfume, now mixed with his cologne, makes my chest ache. "David, don't." The word costs me everything to say. "Not now." She nods, understanding what I can't voice. As she disappears down the corridor, Her footsteps echo like memories falling away. James moves to follow, but I block his path. If anything happens to her, I say quietly, letting him see the truth in my eyes. If she disappears like the others, they'll find you. Not the police. Me. His perfect smile never wavers, but something in his eyes shifts. Recognition, perhaps. Or respect. He steps back, inclining his head slightly. She made her choice, he says, but we both hear the hollow note in his words. I leave him there, surrounded by the wreckage of his latest conquest. In the corridor, I catch a glimpse of Claire through a window, standing alone at the ship's railing. Her black dress ripples in the wind like a flag of surrender, while below, the dark water swallows our reflections whole. The morning after truth breaks, silence fills our cabin like smoke. Claire's side of the bed remains untouched, a desert of pristine white sheets that somehow screams louder than any words could. I trace the hollow where her head should be, remembering how she used to curl into me during storms, as if my body could shield her from thunder. The knock comes at 7:43 a.m. 2 security officers, their faces carved from professional concern. Mr. Harrison? We need to discuss your whereabouts during the incident on Deck 7 last night. Last night. When my world was collapsing in Suite 721, someone else's world was ending 7 decks below. The timing feels like a cruel joke, one tragedy masked by another. The deceased, the older officer says, consulting his notebook, Mr. Phillips, was investigating certain irregularities before his death. Your name appeared in his notes. I remember Phillips, the security guard who collapsed in the casino, who had been watching James, who had a notebook full of photographs and dates, who now lies in the ship's morgue, taking his discoveries to a watery grave. I was with my wife. I say, the words tasting like ash. But was I? The timeline blurs, confrontation, revelation, aftermath. Hours lost to emotional devastation while somewhere below, a man died with evidence that might have saved others. They leave me with questions and a warning to stay available. Through our cabin window, I watch Claire pacing the upper deck, her black dress replaced by something soft and familiar, the blue sundress from happier days. She looks lost, small against the vast ocean. Part of me wants to go to her, to protect her even now. The other part remembers her words. I love him. Marcus finds me later, his face grave. They're saying Phillips had a heart attack, but his notebook is missing. And Mr. Chen's been making calls, expensive calls to expensive lawyers. The piece clicks into place. He thinks I took it. Did you? I think of Phillips collapsing in the casino, the way James and Claire exchanged glances. The timing suddenly feels less like coincidence and more like calculation. Mr. Chen offers his assistance. A steward appears with an envelope. Inside, a note in James's perfect handwriting. Evidence has a way of disappearing at sea. Let me help you, David. For Claire's sake. The threat wraps itself in concern, like everything else about him. I find Claire at the ship's library, surrounded by torn photographs, James with other women, all wearing that same black dress. Her hands shake as she pieces together the pattern she refused to see. He said I was different, she whispers as I approach. He said they were all lies, just jealous exes trying to hurt him. She looks up, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than they've been in days. Phillips showed me proof right before he. The words hang between us, heavy with implication. I sit beside her, careful to maintain distance that feels both necessary and wrong after 15 years of comfortable closeness. When did Phillips talk to you? Last night before. She swallows hard. He had documents, bank records. He said James had done this before, not just the affairs, but the disappearances. He said he could prove it. A new kind of fear blooms in my chest. Did James see you with Phillips? She nods slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. He saw us talking by the casino. An hour later, Phillips was... Her voice breaks. Oh God, David. What have I gotten us into? The ship's horn sounds, 3 long blasts marking the change of watch. Or perhaps marking the moment my wife realizes she's become entangled in something darker than infidelity. Mr. Chen's lawyers will be boarding at the next port. Marcus appears like a shadow bearing warnings. They're saying you were seen arguing with Phillips about your wife. That you had motive. I look at Claire, seeing not the woman who betrayed me, but the girl I fell in love with, the one who cried at sad movies and brought home stray cats. The one now trapped in a web designed by a man who collects broken marriages like others collect art. We need to talk, I tell her softly. About everything. She nods, tears spilling onto the photographs scattered between us like evidence of shared blindness. Outside our window, the ocean stretches endless and dark, hiding its secrets like James Chen hides his. Somewhere in its depths, truth lurks like a predator, patient, hungry, waiting to surface. The harbor approaches like a wound in the horizon, city lights bleeding into dawn. Our last morning at sea feels hollow, each wave bringing us closer to a shore where nothing familiar waits. I find Claire in our cabin, folding clothes with mechanical precision, a habit she developed during our early years when anxiety would overwhelm her. I found this, she says softly, holding up a worn ticket stub from our first date. The paper has yellowed with age, but my handwriting remains clear. The night everything changed. I'd tucked it into her suitcase before the cruise, a romantic gesture that now feels like a relic from another life. The knock interrupts whatever lies between confession and apology. James stands in our doorway, immaculate as always, but something has shifted in his perfect facade. Perhaps it's the way his fingers tap against his leg, a tell I've learned to read. I'm leaving with Claire, he announces, not a question but a statement of ownership. My lawyers have handled the Phillips situation. You'll be cleared of any involvement, David, provided you understand the situation. The silence that follows feels like glass about to break. I watch Claire's hands still over her suitcase, the wedding ring she hasn't yet removed catching morning light like a question. Show him, I say quietly to Claire. She pulls Philip's notebook from beneath her clothes. The evidence James has been searching for, the truth we've been protecting. Phillips gave it to her before he died. Before you killed him. James's smile doesn't waver, but his eyes turn to Winter. That's a serious accusation. 6 women. Claire's voice trembles but holds. 6 cruises. 6 disappearances. She spreads the photographs across our bed, a gallery of lost souls in identical black dresses. I was supposed to be number 7. You don't understand what you're doing. James steps forward, but I move between them. Not out of love now, but duty to the girl who once cried at sad movies and believed in forever. The harbor police are waiting, I tell him. Marcus contacted them last night. They have copies of everything, the pattern, the proof, the payments to cover it up. It's over. The perfect mask finally cracks. Claire, he says, her name a weapon now. Remember what we talked about. Our plans. Our future. But Claire is looking at the photographs, at the faces of women who believed the same promises. I remember who I was, she whispers, more to herself than to him. Before you made me forget. We feel the ship's engines slow, the grand machine preparing for port. Through our window, I see the flashing lights of police boats approaching. James sees them too, his expression shifting from confidence to calculation to something approaching fear. You were different, he tells Claire, one last attempt. What we had was real. No, she replies, and I hear my wife's true voice for the first time in weeks. What we had was a performance. The same one you've given 6 times before. The police arrive with quiet efficiency. As they lead James away, I notice his perfect posture finally slumped, the weight of exposure heavier than any chains. Claire and I stand at the railing, watching the harbor grow closer. Not touching, not speaking, but sharing space in a way that feels both familiar and strange. The morning wind carries away the last traces of her expensive perfume, leaving behind the scent I remember, vanilla and hope and home. I can't stay, she says finally, eyes fixed on the approaching shore. Not after what I've done. What I almost became. I think of our 15 years, The Sunday mornings, the shared dreams, the small kindnesses that built a life. And I think of the stranger she became on this ship, the woman in the black dress who danced with darkness. I know, I reply, because sometimes love means letting go before it turns to poison. We dock as the sun crests the horizon, painting everything in shades of beginning and end. Claire walks down the gangway alone, her blue sundress a rebellion against James's preferred black. She carries only one suitcase, leaving behind the gifts, the clothes, the jewelry that marked her as his next acquisition. I find Marcus at his bar one last time, cleaning glasses that are already clean. You saved her life, he says simply. Even after everything. No, I correct him, watching Claire's figure disappear into the morning crowd. She saved herself. I just reminded her who she was. The ship feels smaller now, its grandeur diminished by truth's harsh light. As passengers disembark, I notice their faces, all carrying stories I'll never know, all harboring shadows and light. I leave my cabin key at reception, declining the offer to book another cruise. Some journeys, I've learned, aren't meant to be repeated. Some roads, once traveled, can never lead home again. But as I step onto solid ground, I carry with me the weight of a different truth, that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of the story you thought you were living, to allow a different one to begin.